We'll now be starting with a keynote by Dave. Dave is an executive global director at Thoughtworks, and he has been working closely with building technology strategy for over 40 years across diverse functions like development, architecture, analytics, infrastructure, emergent ideas, and prototyping, as well as large scale program management. He advises C suite executives on the adoption of lean enterprise and technical strategic thinking. He's a part of technology advisory groups for governments, independent companies, startups, and standard bodies. Over to Dave for the keynote.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It does, however, make me feel somewhat old. Let me start by sharing my screen just to bring my deck up. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so I'm going to cover a lot of ground within this next 15 minutes, and I feel you have to in this day and age. To an extent, we have to understand where we've come from in terms of cybersecurity and threats, and we have to kind of understand where we're going. So I'd like to finish the talk this morning with just a look towards the future of crypto. And some of the techniques that we're seeing now, but are going to become more and more important as we go on. So, really, the point that we have to consider: threats are not if, they are when, and I think we've come to terms with that now. But a lot of businesses are not ready to even withstand simple breaches, let alone potentially constant breaches. So as practitioners, we have to find ways to inject into operating models and daily practices mechanisms to defend against a whole swathe of attack types, whether it's the sort of personal sort of social engineering side of things, whether it's to do with the systems that we create, or whether it's to do with the infrastructure, the buildings that we walk into every day. There's a whole host of various mechanisms. So resilience is a term that's become used over the last sort of decade or so, that's just about how businesses keep the lights on. So when we think about it in terms of how we defend against cyber attacks, it's really how on earth do we keep going, even though we may be under either constant or sort of intermittent attack. So I'd like to just quickly look back that hacking has started and has been with us since before we had the integrated circuit. This is Marconi, and Marconi patented a method of telecommunications, and prior to that there was a bit of an arms race with people trying to get access to I guess the technology and claim rights to its invention, and the guy on the left was a magician. He was also an inventor. In Victorian times it was people had different sort of motivations, but the guy was quite upset that his ideas had been taken, so he actually hacked a telecommunications exchange for Morse code by staging an attack, and this happened in 1903. So there's something about cyber security and attacks that's innate. It's been there. It's competition, it's greed, it's revenge, and it's as old as technology itself. So we shouldn't think of it as something that's new, that's come up in the last sort of 10, 20, 30 years. Cybercrime was predicted a long time ago. This guy's John von Neumann. Computer scientists among us will have learnt at college about the von Neumann architecture, the chip architecture. He did a work with Alan Turing, but he wrote a seminal paper in 1949 that said that a complex computer system, which bear in mind at the time, people were just getting used to the fact that general computer programs were possible, rather than something that had been built specifically for a purpose, that you could have generic programming languages to write, solve general problems, thus the expression Turing complete. John von Neumann predicted that a computer program could invent itself, so it could replicate. So he's seen as the father of computer virology. So that was 1949. This guy, this is my favourite. There was I guess, a movement, and I think this is where, we have to think about different types, the psychology of people that are involved in cybercrime. This is a guy that's nickname is Joy Bubbles. And he was born blind, and he had perfect pitch when he whistled. Who knew that that would be an effective form of of hacking of its sort? Now there was I guess, a subversive movement that started in the 1950s and carried on right the way through to the 1970s, predominantly in the US, but not exclusively, called phone phreaking. And the idea was that you, on your phone, on your local exchange, you could get all around the world for nothing. And the idea was just you did it because you could. And this guy found that he could replicate the tones of the phone exchanges by whistling, and obviously became a bit of a celebrity within the community. So sometimes the attack or the opportunity isn't foreseen. You have to be careful about what you try to defend against. So where are we now? We're at the point where we have nation state attackers and sponsorship to an unprecedented level. We've gone through sort of vote rigging scandals, the Cambridge Analytica scandal here in the UK. We're at the point now where it's past pandemic. It's an endemic situation. And the problem now is that the tools that a hacker can use for whatever the purposes are eminently available, and they're available in a commoditized form. So it isn't particularly difficult for anybody who has some basic skills to find tools and to be able to adopt them and use them for nefarious purposes. Now, maybe sort of 20 years ago, we would think about these as sort of individually, sort of greed-seeking, opportunistic individual hackers or groups thereof. And we still see groups of people that are, sometimes they have a particular political purpose, or they have a sort of an activist, or as the term is coined, a hacktivist. But we're also seeing nation states actually being responsible for this now. So one of the key points here is that nation states have a lot of reasons to employ hacking. It's an indirect form of warfare. There is almost no retribution possible. There are only two forms of retribution possible: diplomacy and warfare, or traditional warfare. Diplomacy often fails, but there's no teeth, there's no way to enforce any changes. And we're seeing countries like North Korea, for example, that are able to avoid sanctions by criminal activity. By, I think, the end of last year, something like 15 billion US dollars had been extracted by the North Korean government. When you think of the size of the sanctions against them and the damage that it was doing to their economy, you can see what their motivation might have been to try and find other ways to earn money, to inject back into their economy. So we're seeing mechanisms of artificial intelligence being used. Every product vendor that you'll see will talk about AI it's a throwaway term now in terms of their defences. But you'll also see that the attackers are using forms of algorithms or machine learning in order to attack. So we're in a game of cat and mouse now. So again, as technologists and practitioners, we have to find ways to break things down into manageable pieces. We have to sort of follow a reductionist path to break things down into things that we can manage to deal with on a daily basis. So this brings me to kind of where we are now. This is a screen grab of an actual heist that took place on the blockchain just a few weeks ago. A lot of money was taken. It was over $330 million, and it was extracted through on the Ethereum blockchain. And as it turned out, a lot of it was given back. So it was a bit of a drama that sort of went up and sort of came down again. But it revealed the dangers of not just the technologies themselves, but also some of the difficulties in retribution. The whole point of a decentralized blockchain is that the fact that nobody controls it. But the problem was the only way to control this was by getting centralized miners to act together, and therefore replicating what a bank would do, in essence. So whether that is, sort of effectively sort of diminishing the sort of decentralized nature of a blockchain or not, remains to be seen. But this particular page that you're looking at was actually a message that was encoded onto the blockchain, and you have to be logged in to be able to read the message. But communications, the sort of ransom notes, were deployed onto the blockchain in exactly the same way that the funds were taken from the blockchain. So we have to understand what the mentality is of people that are doing this. Yes, we have greed. Yes, we have sponsorship, competition. There's a lot of bigotry and ideals. Countries will try to attack other countries that they have some form of idealistic problem with. And one of the mechanisms of doing this is that they often don't have this capability themselves. So they're renting the capability off the dark web. The problem is that the companies or groups that they rent to do this work for them, who do indeed undertake this work, follow with possibly working against them themselves, and therefore have all the knowledge about the country that they've been working for. So their allegiances shift, and sometimes they're working for more than one person at any one time. So we have to sort of understand how ingrained the problem becomes, and a lot of people are just fighting to get onto the bandwagon. So we're becoming familiar with cryptology and sort of mechanisms that are being employed and have been employed for a while, such as the blockchain, as sort of mechanisms of not just business, but in terms of like validity, but being careful with people's identity. One of the criticisms of the Bitcoin blockchain was, in fact, that because everything's transparent, that people's identity or their keys can be inferred quite directly, and that was the point of it. It was supposed to be transparent and shared, but actually it's not actually very secure. So there's mechanisms that have been developed to help with that, and this is a concept that I've written an article about if anyone wants to find it, on Thoughtworks, called about zero knowledge proofs. Now, zero knowledge proofs are I haven't got time to go into how they work, but I wouldn't have anyway within 15 minutes if I just solely concentrated on this. But the point is that a zero knowledge proof is purely about giving someone a token, and that token doesn't have to release any information about the underlying data, but the token itself can show validity. It proves that the person has the asset or the information that they claim, because there is an exchange of information that proves that. So that token can then it's effectively validated, but is useless for any other for any other purpose. So self-sovereign identity, I can prove who I am, and a token can be generated, and that token can be used. But that token itself doesn't reveal anything about me or my information. And the point is that I have control of of that token, not some other sort of identity management system, which is the way things work now. So look out for this more in the future. This is what is going to be is already been employed in trying to lock down existing sort of blockchains, but is also a technique that stands alone in its own right for, I guess, the replacement of the many current mechanisms for identity management, e-voting, even DNA analysis, authentication of all sorts. So, you know, this is something that I'm quite excited about. I've written an article about it. I ask you to go and have a look at it. And that all has to sit within that reductionist framework where we break things down into sort of a zero trust environment where the sort of citadel of control, the perimeter is broken, and everything is seen as being accessible but also defensible. So with that absolute drive-by of where we are, where we've come from, the worries that we have, and some of the techniques that are going to be employed, I'll hand you back, and hopefully that sort of whirlwind tour will, you know, open up the day for everybody.
Thank you for the very informative keynote, Dave.